if you take a look at Deep Purple forums around the web, you'll find kind of a split opinion on Roger Glover, both as a bass player and as a producer. And I have seen a few comments where his production on the first Michael Schenker album is particularly singled out for abuse. And I've always been a fan of the first two Michael Schenker albums, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the production textures and traits of this album. So start off with the lead-off track, Armed and Ready. First thing that you notice about the production on it is that it's very dry. It's supposed to sound like a live album, but it has a direct into the board feeling to it as well, and it's a very up-tempo, arena-friendly riff and everything, but you don't feel a lot of shake coming out of the production. Moving on to Cry for the Nations, which is an excellent song. You've got a couple points in here where there's just a blur of noise. I mean, when the drums first kick in, there's a spike, and then again at the great vocal and guitar harmony, the mix just a little bit off. And then when it comes to Victim of Illusion, we're right back to that dry board sound. And so what I feel on the first three tracks is that there's a great rush behind the recording of the album. I think the band was on tour or just come off tour and were getting ready to go back on tour, and then they make another album the following year. So this album really does have a dashed off feeling to it. But speaking strictly about the production, the two most obvious elements of it are that there's that dry, direct to the board feeling combined with an attempt to get a live texture going, which all goes out the window on the next track, which is Bayou Pleasurette, an acoustic track that has a lot of overdubbing guitar on it. It is a really well recorded song, and there's not that same dry texture. There's a bit of echo on it, there's a room sound to it, there's an atmosphere to it, and I think that they might have spent a little more time on getting the recording of this one down than they did on, say, Armed and Ready. Feels like a good thing, has a great Bonham-esque sound to the drums, but again, everything up on the higher end of the mix is very dry. When we flip it over to Into the Arena, this is another instrumental guitar showcase for Schenker, and the guitar is recorded very well. One of the things is Schenker likes to play with the wah pedal in order to get different tones rather than a wah wah sound. He tries to find textures to solo in and play with that are just slightly different gradations of how far he pushes down the pedal or raises it. And so I feel like Into the Arena does a great job of capturing this tendency, and if you dig a little bit deeper, you can see that it was done through multi-tracking the guitar solos. So Schenker's notoriously really good for double tracking and triple tracking note for note his own solos, and by doing that he could really capture that nuanced tone. And Schenker's another one of those players that treats every note basically with some kind of vibrato or texture. So I would say that when it gets to the breakdown section where the drums are soloing and it gets in kind of the freeform area of it, the production really starts to waver and almost break down a bit. There's not a drive to see it through, and the song almost loses speed. It regains itself and finishes fairly strong. Looking Out from Nowhere was another one where the tune seems to just be hovering in a static state of dead room sound, and it doesn't really have a live feeling. If you listen to it through headphones, there's not a lot of dynamics going on in it, even though the basic riff and the arrangement of the song seem like they'd be perfect to do some various textures and stereo panning. And so on Tales of Mystery, we've got another effort to put in some thought and reflection to production, and I think this one comes off really well. It's a ballad. I think if you could make one criticism of the mix on here, is that the vocals are a little bit too loud. I think the vocals were mixed a little bit too high, and because of that, it makes the song a little bit too sentimental. I mean, the lyrics are sentimental, but the overly loud mix of the vocals makes it really seem that way. And now on Lost Horizons, I feel and have always felt that this one's where the production misfires the most. There's a lot of freeform soundscape at the beginning of it, like it sounds like whales singing, out at sea, or strange Hendrix-inspired soundscapes, and it's okay, but I think there should have been the texture of that presentation should have been more upfront. It should have been it. You have to kind of really listen for it, which I guess is kind of the point. But then when it kicks in, boy, does the song kick in really loud. It's kind of almost jarring. It doesn't show a lot of nuance. And so I think that all in all, how I feel about Roger Glover's production on this album is that, in fact, you can see that they had to do it really quickly. I mean, it was recorded from May to July in 1980 and released in August. So the whole thing was done like on just as quick as you can imagine. And it was the first solo album for Michael Schenker, so what you really want to do is capture the guitar performances quite well. And I think he did this, but in the way that he went about getting a good guitar tone, it seemed to defeat the overall impact of each track as a whole because of that bored, dry, almost one-dimensional, overly guitar sound. So all in all, I think he did a pretty good job given what he was tasked with, which is to present Schenker in the greatest light possible. But if you were a huge Deep Purple fan and you found out that Roger Glover was going to produce the first Michael Schenker album and you started listening to this and were expecting it to sound anything like Deep Purple, you would be completely disappointed because, for one thing, while there are keyboards on the album, they're very undermixed and very underutilized, and they're not given particularly deep thought or consideration. And also with the soloing, with Richie Blackmore, if you listen to Deep Purple, they don't really boost. They do sometimes boost him in the mix in a noticeable way, like on Highway Star or something for effect, but it's not an every single time he solos thing. The solo on Smoke in the Water could be played right there in the room. There's no massive, jacking up of the signal in the studio, whereas every time Schenker solos, even when he's doing little fills on here, someone is at the console just pushing it up with a stick. So I think that if you were grading it like on a letter grade, I'm gonna give it like a B-, and I feel that some people might give it a C or even lower, but if you take into account how fast he had to work, I think it deserves a B-. So that's what I think. If you have a thought on this or any other topic connected to classic or contemporary music, please comment in the section below, and remember to like and subscribe. Thanks a lot.